Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Is there anybody who had any issues homework-wise or logistics or couldn't find something they needed, was looking for information, anything like that?
No.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. I looked at your homework before I logged on today, and it seems like a majority of you did your homework assignments over the weekend, so that's good news. I know people struggled a little bit with the big assignment, but all of this is new to you. The logistics of the system is new to you, so that doesn't surprise me, but hopefully got a majority of the points. We'll move on, okay? So the next two class periods, we're gonna cover chapter 2. So we're gonna do half today and half on Wednesday. Your homework for chapter 2 will be due on Sunday. I believe it's your only chapter homework assignment. I think we start on chapter 3. Actually, I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll start on chapter 3 on Friday and won't finish it till Monday, which means your homework will not be due this coming Sunday for chapter 3, even though we will have started it. So chapter 2 homework, unless there is a news analysis, which I don't believe there is this week, it should just be the one homework assignment. Shouldn't be too terribly difficult, but there are some concepts in this chapter that can be a little tricky for some students. So some of you are gonna see me go through the lecture today at kind of a slow pace, especially when we get to a concept called comparative advantage. And it's only because I know that there is a good number of students who will have a hard time, not with the math, but with just wrapping their brain around this concept. And so it's a really important concept, so we're gonna spend a little extra time on it just to make sure everybody's got it, okay? In case you didn't see the chat about recording and posting lectures, I am getting a lot of questions about recording and posting lectures. I am going to record lectures every single day. It might not be your class though. I teach 3 sections of this back to back to back. On Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I will be recording one of those class periods. If you do not want to be recorded, if you do not want your class period to be recorded for whatever reason, just let me know, okay? Yeah, thanks for, on my chapter 3 homework is due the 23rd. Okay, thanks for the heads up, Vidal. I will take a look at that. I don't think that's correct, but I will let you know on Wednesday for sure after I take a look at that. Wait a minute.
Yeah, that's what it's saying in BB Learn.
On the 23rd, okay, yep, thanks for that. Let me take a look at that. According to the schedule I wrote out for myself, we're gonna spread chapter 3 over a couple days. So let me take a look at that. But I believe only chapter 2 is due on Sunday. So I will be recording lectures. I won't be posting them the same day I record them or even the same week. I am familiar with the way the economic choice works, and I'm going to give you an incentive to come to class every day. Probably as we get closer to the exam, maybe a week out when you start doing your test prep with your SI and things like that, I'll post them all up online. So if you want to go rewatch them, part of them, if you did miss an entire lecture, you can go and watch it, but I do want to incent you to come every day. Any questions about that? Concerns? All right, let's get started then. All right, so chapter 2, again, kind of a choppy chapter. We're going to introduce you to some economic tools that we will use over and over and over again in this class, so it's pretty important that you understand them. They're pretty basic. If you took high school econ, which I know a lot of you did, you will have covered a lot of these concepts. But I know that different teachers teach from a different perspective, teach a different way. So even though you've already heard this before, the terminology might be a little bit different, and they're just that important that I think we need to refresh your memory. Okay, might have been a couple years for you. And then we're going to talk about economic systems. Now, we won't get to economic systems today. We'll get to that on Wednesday, but I think perhaps that's the most interesting part of the chapter, and it's really talking about different economies and what end of that economic system spectrum that they're on. And when we talk about the spectrum of economic systems, we're really talking about communism or command and capitalism as being the polar opposite ends of that particular spectrum. So that'll be a pretty interesting discussion, but we'll have it on Wednesday. So the first thing we're going to talk about is opportunity costs. This is a pretty basic concept when it comes to making choices in economics, okay? We already touched on this a little bit. Because of scarcity, and because I assume you can't have everything, we have to make choices. Choices with our time, choices with our energy, choices with our money. And when you make a choice, one of the fundamental things that economics forces you to think about is that you had to give something else up. You passed on some other opportunity in terms of time, energy, or money that you now do not get back. You spend that 10 bucks, it's gone. You spend that energy, it's gone. You spend that time, it's gone. And the fact is, you gave something up. Chances are you gave a lot of different things up that you could have done. In economics, when we think about your opportunity cost, we only think about the opportunity cost, the cost of taking the opportunity that you took with your money, your time, your energy. We only consider the next best thing you would be doing. Because the fact is, in a single given 50 minutes of your time that you're going to be sitting in this class today, you can't do every other thing other than sit in class, but you could have made a different choice to do one other thing other than sit in class. When you spend that $10, you could have spent it on something else, but we can't consider everything you could have bought for that $10 because you can't buy everything for that $10. So when we think about what you gave up, we only consider the next best foregone alternative. A lot of students get this wrong. This will surely be a question on your exam. And some of you will be like, it's everything else I gave up. No, it's that one thing. So, for example, open up your chat box. What is the opportunity cost of coming to class today? I suspect I know what a majority of the answers are going to be. For some reason, I'm not seeing my chat box come up. Sorry. Okay, I'm unable to see my chat box for some reason.
Everyone's saying sleep.
Yeah, and that doesn't surprise me, right? So mostly going to be sleep. It could have been, and in my later classes, it will likely be, it could be eating, could be hanging out with friends, could be prepping for another class, right? But it's one thing. It's one singular thing. So please keep that in mind. By definition, and this is a good definition to know, because when it comes to definitions, a lot of times I do them word for word. Opportunity cost, the value of the next best alternative foregone when an activity or item is chosen. In this case, we're talking about an opportunity cost in terms of time, right? What else would you be doing with your time? It's an opportunity lost and has monetary and or non-monetary costs. Now, there could be both. So for example, let's say that you could be working right now but instead you came to class. Well, then you gave up money by not coming to class, right? Most of you, it's non-monetary, it's sleep, hanging out with friends, whatever, okay? But it could be both, it could be either, but a lot of times it is a combination of the two. All right, so let's walk through an example real quick, okay? Let's make an assumption, okay? Let's make an assumption that when you decided to come to school full-time, I know not all of you are full-time, but we're gonna make that assumption, that the alternative to going to college was getting a job, that you really, that you weren't gonna be able to just sit around for a year, okay? So we're gonna assume that you gave up the opportunity to have a full-time job in order to come to school. Now, again, right, everybody has different circumstances. Let's say that at that job, you would have earned 10 bucks an hour. This is an old calculation. I know minimum wage has changed. But let's say about 10 bucks an hour or $20,000 a year is what you gave up in income that you could have worked at that full-time job. Now, let's say you get to campus, you get an on-campus job, you find a part-time job somewhere here in Flag doing something, and you're able to work 20 hours a week. So you're able to make back half of that income. Okay, so $10,000. So I'm just working you through some of the numbers, and then we'll talk about the calculation, right? And then this is your author's example. It's nowhere near accurate. Plus the direct costs of going to college, you wish, right? Tuition, books, fees of $6,000 a year. The monetary opportunity costs of coming to college could be calculated using these numbers. You see this $20,000 here, that was foregone. Your next best thing was working. That was your next best thing, working full time, okay? So that's the $20,000 you gave up, minus the $10,000 you made back. We're trying to calculate what it costs you in terms of money to come to school instead of work, okay? So we can subtract that $10,000 because you made it back and it's no longer a cost of coming to school in terms of money, okay? And then we added the $6,000, giving us a monetary opportunity cost of coming to college of $16,000. Why did we not include room, so like rent, board, food, personal expenses, clothes, toiletries, whatever? Why didn't we include those in this calculation?
Those are a normal standard cost of living. It would regardless happen.
Right. You were going to have some of those same expenses anyway, right? And while those expenses might be different between Flagstaff and wherever you're from, could be cheaper in Flagstaff, but for a lot of you, Flagstaff's more expensive, right? We're going to assume that those are going to stay pretty standard across the board, okay? But you'd have them anyway, whether you were working or going to college, so we're not going to include those, right? How about some non-monetary opportunity costs of coming to college? Whether you physically came to Flagstaff, I know some of you are and some of you aren't, or just spending the time going to college, what are some of the non-monetary opportunity costs that we could add to this list? This is just monetary. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to see the chat box, so why don't you just unmute yourself? You all have non-monetary ones. Help me out here, folks.
Being a full-time student requires more time of the week than a full-time job.
Yeah, so what would you rather be doing with that time? What's the next best thing for you?
I would just categorize it as free time.
Yeah, free time. Okay, great. Good, we can do that. Yeah, less free time. What else?
Being away from my family.
Being away from your family. For some of you, it's a plus. For some of you, it's a minus, right? But yeah, being away from your family. What else? The quicker you answer my questions, the quicker I will let you go.
If COVID wasn't going on, it'd be traveling.
Yeah, exactly. Great. Give up traveling. It's a big one. What else? I want a couple more.
Well, the monetary one is like, so I'm living in Flagstaff, so like, the rent's like a lot more expensive here versus what like being in Phoenix.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I get things like, I miss my pet, right? Those of you from Cali, like the beach, right? Wherever you're from, I'm sure there's something you're going to miss. That's going to be a non-monetary opportunity cost. Okay, so a lot of times it's a combination of the two. We'll move on. All right, so let's talk about sunk costs. This is something that comes up over and over and over again in your real life. And a lot of us approach this from a really inefficient perspective. A sunk cost, and here we know that cost can be money, time, and energy, right? It's a cost that already incurred. It's money you already spent. It's time you already spent. It's energy you already spent that cannot be recovered. People, you know who I'm talking to right now when I say you are in relationships in which there are a lot of sunk costs that keep you in that relationship, that you have an old car, right, that you keep having to put money into, and you're using that as a justification to keep it. There are a lot of different circumstances where people use a cost they've already incurred to justify continuing to sink time, money, and energy into that thing. This is a really old saying, and as the years go by, I realize how old it is, but this is something that like my parents would have said to me. You're throwing good money after bad. Like if you put a new transmission in that vehicle and 2 weeks later the engine goes, the transmission and the money you spent on it actually is totally irrelevant because that's money you're not going to get back. You already spent it. That was a decision you made in the past. And really the only thing that matters are present decisions and future decisions. And so in economics, the decisions that you made in the past, we actually do not use as any sort of basis for the decision that we're making currently or the decision that we make into the future. Food for thought, right? I see people do this all the time. Use sunk costs as a basis for making current and future decisions. All right, this is one of the most important things from this chapter. And for some of you, it's the most difficult. Comparative advantage is one of the most important concepts in economics when we think about who produces what. There's a reason that there are things we produce here in the United States, and there are reasons we don't produce certain things here in the United States. And it's based on comparative advantage, which is by far one of the most important economic concepts there is in terms of production and trade. You and I will all specialize in the task in which we are best suited to do. Mine is teaching economics. Somewhere along the line, I gained comparative advantage in teaching economics. So it's what I specialize in. I don't specialize in teaching chemistry. Nobody wants that because I'm not good at it, right? And to get good at it, it would take me so much time and energy that it's just not an efficient thing for me to do. I need to stick with what I'm good at, what I know how to do, what I'm already trained and educated to do. And so comparative advantage is really the justification for specialization, which means you produce one thing well and you go buy everything else that you need with the money you receive from producing that good in which you have comparative advantage. The law of comparative advantage says, there's a reason this is in red, okay? This is going to come up over and over and over again. The law of comparative advantage says that the individual, firm, region, or country with the lowest opportunity cost of producing a particular good or service should specialize in that good or service. So this is a calculation, not about how much, it's not about how much you spend to produce something. It's about how much you give up when you produce something. And from an economic perspective, and if you begin to think about this and wrap your head around this, it'll all make sense. It's about who gives up the least, right? And to be honest with you, I get up at 7 o'clock, get myself ready to teach, come in here, pull up the chapter, give myself a quick run through, and I'm ready to teach. It doesn't actually take me a lot of time to prepare to teach economics because I've done it so much. I've gotten really efficient, right? And I have specialized in the tasks that I'm better at. So I give up very little actually to teach economics. Now, if I picked on one of you and said, you need to teach chapter 3, it would take you probably between now and the time and Friday to even begin to be partially prepared to teach chapter 3. That's not efficient for you to spend an entire week preparing to teach a chapter when I can do it in about 5 or 6 minutes. So I have comparative advantage because I will give up the least in order to produce that particular good or service. The law of comparative advantage explains, yeah, go ahead, Colby.
Could education count as like an comparative advantage as well? So like, let's say back when you were in college and decided to be a teacher, but you
Yeah.
decided to go with a different field. Could that comparative advantage been like a different career path for you, such as like finance or business or something like that, that could have paid more money than being a teacher or professor?
Yeah. So I don't have a teaching degree, right? I have an MBA, and at the college level, that's kind of what qualifies you. I would say that that's probably just a discussion about opportunity cost and not necessarily comparative advantage.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah.
Yep.
The law of comparative advantage explains why all that stuff at Walmart that you buy at Walmart is made in China. It's because for the US economy to produce really cheap, inexpensive consumer goods, we have to give up our labor to that instead of Americans doing more valuable, higher valued functions. If we spend our labor making that sort of, as Americans, making that sort of disposable, cheap stuff, it's not cost effective. You and I wouldn't be able to afford American-made household goods. We just wouldn't. But what it does is it deprives the US economy from using that labor to do something more valuable, which before COVID hit, COVID's a totally different animal, but before COVID hit, we were at full employment. We had run out of labor here in the United States. This is a real change in employment. I mean, really drastically from one end to another, because before COVID hit, we were at full employment, which is about 3 to 4% unemployment. But there's always people who are switching jobs, or there's always reasons, and that's a macroeconomic concept, that there's always a few percent unemployment, but there always will be, right? Because there are people that work seasonally, work up at the Snow Bowl, run in you know, ski lessons or whatever. There's always a little unemployment. We were at full employment. And I was actually worried that the US economy was going to run out of labor and people, especially because of our immigration policies, that our GDP, our gross domestic product, was going to grow stagnant because we were going to be out of labor, right? Sorry, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there. But the reason that we outsource production to other countries of some of the goods, a lot of the goods that we consume, is because of this concept of comparative advantage. Okay? Things are changing a little bit. I don't know how much. We'll just have to see together how it all pans out. Because of specialization and exchange or trade, exchange and trade are the same thing. Because of specialization and trade, everyone is better off. Everyone is better off because I'm an economics teacher, right? And then I take my salary and go buy the goods that I need that I didn't produce for myself. Everybody's better off because every single person in our economy specializes, companies specialize, our country specializes, and we trade. Why? Because we become more efficient at production when we specialize. When the College of Business called me up 3 weeks ago and said, hey, we need you to teach an extra section, that wasn't a problem. I said, sure, no problem. Because that's what I specialize in and I'm efficient at it, and it actually doesn't add that much work to my load, right? That's what we want in this economy, to produce a lot of stuff with the least amount of effort, right? Because of comparative advantage, we can do that. Everyone gets more of everything at a lower price because of specialization and trade, which stems from this concept of comparative advantage. Okay. All right, so this next slide, we're going to do a quick comparison between something called absolute advantage and comparative advantage, which you already know. Absolute advantage is another theory, another concept. It's just another analysis that someone might want to do, okay? Absolute advantage isn't based on opportunity cost, it's focused on resources. Absolute advantage is the ability to produce something using fewer resources than others. So using the fewest amount of a resource. Resources we know, right, are natural resources. That could be labor, entrepreneurial ability, capital, whatever. In economics, we don't care about this. We don't care about absolute advantage. It's not something we analyze. It's not something we pay attention to. Who cares about absolute advantage? And sorry, you guys are going to have to raise your hand or just unmute yourself or something. Who cares about this?
Would businesses care about this?
Businesses, sure, they might care about this, especially if they're in a market with a lot of competition. They might care about their resource usage. Good. Who else?
You know, I would say that this is the most counterintuitive part of comparative advantage, that despite a country having absolute advantage, it's still better to allocate which production of which product, at least on a macroeconomic scale. That's how we analyze it. It's still better for the country that produces both less to specialize, and then the person who can do more to specialize as well, despite too. Yeah, I'm going on.
Yeah, because who cares about absolute advantage? Why would someone focus on absolute instead of comparative? Any thoughts? What kind of person? Someone in perhaps what field, or any thoughts?
I mean, if you're physically producing a product, I would reasonably assume that the lower the amount of product you can use, the cheaper it would be for your operation.
Sure. So a company who was trying to cut costs by utilizing fewer resources would care about absolute advantage, right? Sure. Anybody else you can think of who might care?
I think people oriented around like saving the like going green and saving like the like global warming and that kind of stuff would be more oriented towards it.
Absolutely. So people interested in the environment, hopefully is a lot of us, right? Might be interested in using the fewest resources possible. So people in the environmental field and companies who want to be sustainable and go green, good. Maybe even the government might be concerned about this. Understanding resource supplies and needing to conserve resource supplies might also be thinking about the absolute advantage. From an economic perspective, we don't care about this, okay? Now, environmental economists might say, no, I totally care about this. Yeah, okay, but just from a purely sort of fundamental economic standpoint, this is not our focus. It's not our focus. Comparative advantages. Go ahead.
Another group of people that would care about this would also be politicians caring about international trade as well, because you know, if you believe you have the absolute advantage as a politician, you might think, why don't we produce all our stuff at home?
Yeah, you make a great point. If you're a politician, you could spin absolute advantage to sound like a sound economic rationale for producing something in the United States. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure it's been done, folks. I'm sure it's been done. Yeah, great. Okay, I'm gonna say something here that I don't believe is in your book and I didn't put on the slide, but I can promise you is gonna be on your exam, okay? There is zero connection between these two things. Just because you have absolute does not mean you have comparative. Just because you have comparative does not mean you have absolute. You can have both, you can have neither, or you can have one or the other. There is no way to predict absolute based on comparative or comparative based on absolute. There is no connection, no link between these two analyses at all. So if I were to say to you, Nancy Baca has absolute advantage in the production of sweaters, do you know if I have comparative advantage or not? You have no idea. Just because I have comparative advantage in the production of economics education says nothing about whether I have absolute advantage or not, okay? No link between the two. All right. All right, so we're gonna go on to this little calculation here. Students struggle with this, okay? It's not the math that's difficult. It's just wrapping your brain around all the different pieces of this comparative advantage calculation, okay? I'm gonna go through it slowly on a piece of paper that I'm going to have next to me on the screen, okay? And then at some point I'll go full screen with it and you can take a picture of the math if you need to, but I suggest you pull out a piece of paper right now and you try and follow through this with me, okay? Again, I made the math easy so that the math wouldn't be an issue, but it's keeping track of all your numbers and making sure you understand what you're calculating, okay? We're gonna calculate comparative advantage right now. So let me tell you what you're looking at here. You're looking at a small chart that contains the number of labor hours it takes each of these countries to produce 1 unit of either of those goods. So it takes the UK 2 labor hours to produce 1 unit of wheat, etc. Okay? We have to make an assumption here that these 2 countries only produce these 2 goods. In reality, each of these countries produces thousands of goods. We're keeping the math simple because it's the concept I need you to understand, okay? All right. So let me set up my little chart here and then we'll go through the math to see if we can figure out who has comparative advantage. Some of you, and it really depends on how you process information, some of you already know, but a lot of you don't. So we're going to go through it, okay? So you can see here next to me, I've set up, okay, hang on. I've set up a similar chart, right? UK, US, wheat, and cloth. Let's do wheat first. If these countries produce wheat, their opportunity cost comes in terms of what? What do they have to forego to produce wheat?
Time.
Time that they could be what?
Producing cloth.
Thank you, producing cloth. They only produce 2 goods. So if they use labor hours to produce wheat, then they can't use those same labor hours to produce cloth, okay? So what we're gonna do here at the bottom, okay, is we're gonna calculate opportunity cost. So we know if we're producing wheat, the opportunity cost comes in terms of cloth foregone, okay? So now let's calculate what the cloth foregone would be. So if the UK spends 2 hours to make 1 unit of wheat, if they took that same 2 hours and applied it to the production of cloth, how much cloth could they have made instead?
1/3.
1/3 of a unit. Good. Does everybody see that? That it takes 6 units to, or I'm sorry, 6 labor hours to produce 1 unit of cloth in the UK? 2 of 6 is 1/3. Good. Okay. So 1/3 of a unit of cloth is the opportunity cost of producing wheat in the UK. So now let's do it for the US, okay? So the US takes 1 hour to produce 1 unit of wheat. If they take that same 1 hour to produce a unit of cloth, how much cloth could they have made instead? How much did they give up?
1/5.
1/5. Thanks, Colby. Okay, so 1/5. So now this is what we have is the opportunity cost of producing wheat in the UK and the US. Who has the lowest opportunity cost of producing wheat, the UK or the US?
The US.
The US, right? And so the US has comparative advantage in the production of wheat. Okay? Okay. Who had absolute advantage of producing wheat?
The United States.
The United States did as well, because look, it only took 1 resource hour, that labor hour, only took 1 in the US, it took 2 in the UK. Okay, so it turns out the US had both absolute and comparative, doesn't matter, just a side note, okay? All right, so next we're gonna do cloth, okay? So when you produce cloth, your opportunity cost comes in terms of wheat foregone, okay? So let's do that. If the UK took the 6 hours that they used to make 1 unit of cloth and they applied it towards the production, towards the production of wheat, how many units of wheat could they have made?
3 units of wheat.
3 units of wheat. Good. Does everybody see that? You take 6 labor hours and apply it to wheat, which takes 2 labor hours per unit. You have 6 divided by 2, which gives you 3. Okay? All right, let's do it for the US. They spent 5 labor hours making cloth. If they took that 5 labor hours and applied it to the production of wheat, how much wheat could they have made instead?
5.
5 units. Okay? So who has comparative advantage in the production of cloth?
The UK.
The UK. They have the lowest opportunity cost. So in this world, with these economies, the US should specialize in the production of cloth, only make cloth, okay? The UK should specialize in the the US should make wheat, and the UK should make cloth. We should specialize, and then we should trade with one another. That's the way international trade works currently, is we don't sit down and do the calculation. We don't sit down and do a calculation here in the United States where we say, all right, let's see if we have comparative advantage. It just works out. It just works out. When we lose comparative advantage in an industry here in the United States, it gets shipped overseas. Not because I or some economist somewhere sat down and did the calculation. It's because naturally that's what happens. Economies really are these kind of living, breathing entities that work a lot of stuff out on their own. We don't have to force a lot of it. Sometimes we do, but we don't usually have to. A lot of this just happens naturally because of human decision-making, profit motives, things like that. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm gonna bring this up closer to you. Okay, in case you need, sorry, I don't even, okay. In case you need it bigger, you want to take a snapshot of it, something like that, okay? All right.
Oh, can you hold it up again just a little
Yeah,
higher?
no problem. Can you guys, sorry, I know the light in this room is weird. Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so my chat box just came back up when I stopped sharing my screen. So I'm gonna look at the questions we have here. What about taxes they take off of paychecks? Colby, I don't know what that was referring to. Do you want to elaborate on that?
That was a while ago. I think it was back to when we were talking about comparative advantage of prices. Like you were calculating like tuition costs or whatever, but that's what it was about.
Oh, okay.
You make like 10,000 a year, but that doesn't include taxes. So they take
You're
out.
right. You're right. It sure doesn't. Yeah, we didn't take that into consideration at all. Yeah. Could resources affect a comparative advantage? It's actually, that's a great question, Ashley. It actually is one of the biggest things that impacts comparative advantage. Why does the Chinese economy have comparative advantage in the production of cheap, disposable consumer goods? They have so many people. Exactly. They have so many labor, they have so much unused labor, that labor's so incredibly cheap that that is what has actually given them comparative advantage. We can't compete with that here in the US. We just don't have the populations that they have. And so they have comparative advantage in those goods because of their resources. Great question, and we'll come back to that, Ashley, in future chapters. So let's go back. I think we have one more PowerPoint that I want to get through. And it brings us to labor and this concept of division of labor. Division of labor is really, really important when it comes to managing productivity. This is something that you're very familiar with, but hasn't always been commonplace here in the United States or in the world. And in some places, it's not common in the world, this division of labor concept. The example of division of labor that we know here in the US is assembly lines. Who implemented the first assembly line?
Ford Motor Companies.
Thank you. It was Ford. He took the production of the Model T from like a day and a half to an hour and a half overnight by implementing this division of labor concept. So basically separating production into different tasks. We know that increases productivity. That's its biggest upside. And it helps individual workers specialize in just that task. They get really good at it, they get really efficient, and they begin to do it faster and faster and faster because it's the only thing they're focused on. Now, the problem is we're humans. And when we do something on repeat over and over and over again, it starts to create problems. So there definitely is a downside in the repetition of it all. Our mind was not built to do the same thing over and over again, 40 hours a week, right? So we begin to be distracted and things like that. But it also, because it's so tedious and because it's so repetitive, the human body actually wasn't designed for that either. So our bodies break down, minds break down or lose focus. And so a lot of these sort of routine, repetitive tasks, we've actually began to ask machinery to do that instead, because with some periodic maintenance of those machines, they are much more reliable than the human. In many cases, not always. We haven't replaced everybody with a machine, obviously, because there are some tasks that still are better done by people, quality control type things, typically. But robots, machines, they just don't break down at the same rate that you and I would. In a lot of other countries, there isn't division of labor. Labor is so cheap, it actually doesn't matter. Increasing productivity doesn't matter when you have so many people, you're getting all the productivity you need. We here in the US, because our labor costs are so incredibly high, we need labor to be as productive as possible. And so in order to maximize that, this division of labor concept is really what we use to keep any comparative advantage that we possibly have. That's where I'm gonna break for today. The stuff coming up on Wednesday is pretty important stuff too, so please make sure you tune in. I will hang out for a few minutes in case anybody wants to hang out for questions. I do have office hours today at the same place from 11:30 to 12:30. So if you think of something and you want to come back, I will be here. But other than that, I will see you guys on Wednesday. Have a good morning.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
Hold on, my video. So on the Cengage homework, how does it work with the attempts? Like, do we only have one attempt?
Most assignments you're going to have 3.
Okay.
I think that. Go ahead.
Oh, so I was doing it last night and it wasn't allowing me to try another version. And then it was already kind of late last night, so I didn't want to, like, you know.
Yeah. Was it, which homework assignment? Was it like giving you 3 attempts? The first one or the second one or both?
The first one.
Yeah, see, I think the first one might be a little different. I think the first one only gave you 1 attempt, but your chapter 1 homework should have given you 3.
Okay, all right, that's it.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure that
Yeah,
was like.
I think the news analysis, which kind of are sporadic sprinkled throughout the semester, I don't think those give you 3 attempts either, but your regular chapter homework should.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Of course.
Bye.